Let me ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with yourself. The last time something went wrong, maybe you failed a test, said the wrong thing in a conversation, got rejected, or made a mistake at work. What was the very first thought that popped into your head? Was it something kind, something gentle, something you would say to a friend? Or was it something sharper, darker, something almost cruel? Was it, I am so stupid, or maybe I can never do anything right, or perhaps the most brutal one of all, I am a failure? Because if it was, I need you to know something important right now before we go any further. You are not alone, you are not broken, and that voice in your head, the one that attacks you the moment things go wrong, is not telling you the truth. It is not your personality. It is not your identity. It is not even really you. It is a pattern. A deeply wired, psychologically rooted, neurologically reinforced pattern. And today, we are going to take that pattern apart piece by piece, because once you understand where it comes from, how it works, and what it is actually doing to your brain and your life, you will never hear that voice the same way again. Welcome. Let us talk about the psychology of negative self-talk. So what exactly is negative self-talk? I mean, we all kind of know what it feels like. That critical inner monologue, the harsh commentary running in the background of our minds. But psychologically, what is actually happening? In cognitive psychology, negative self-talk is defined as internal dialogue that is critical, self-defeating, and emotionally charged. And the key figure who really brought this into scientific focus was a psychiatrist named Aaron Beck, who in the 1960s was trying to understand why his depressed patients all seemed to share one strange thing in common, a relentless stream of automatic, negative thoughts about themselves, their world, and their future. Beck called these automatic thoughts. And the word automatic is everything here, because these thoughts do not feel chosen. They do not feel like decisions. They arrive instantly, almost like reflexes, triggered by situations, memories, emotions. And because they arrive so fast and feel so true, most people never even question them. They just absorb them. They just believe them. Beck went on to develop what we now know as cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most researched and effective psychological treatments ever created. And the entire foundation of it rests on this idea that our thoughts are not facts, that the voice inside our head can be wrong, that it can be distorted, that it can be, in many ways, lying to us. And the specific ways it lies are what psychologists call cognitive distortions. And if you have never heard this term before, get ready, because you are about to recognize yourself in almost every single one of them. The first and perhaps most common cognitive distortion is all or nothing thinking, and it sounds exactly like what it is. It is the voice that says, I failed once, therefore I am a complete failure. It leaves no room for nuance, no room for growth, no room for the beautiful complexity of being a human being who sometimes succeeds and sometimes does not. Everything is black or white, perfect or worthless, and anything short of total success is total failure. Then there is catastrophizing, the mental habit of taking a small or medium problem and turning it into the end of the world. You make one mistake at work and the voice says, I am going to get fired, I will never find another job, my whole life is going to fall apart. The spiral is instant. The disaster is certain. And the part that makes catastrophizing so insidious is that it feels rational in the moment, like you are just being realistic, just thinking ahead, just preparing for the worst. But you are not preparing, you are drowning. There is also mind reading, which is when you become utterly convinced you know what other people are thinking about you. And surprise, they are always thinking something bad. You walk into a room and feel people judging you. You send a message, and when you do not get an immediate reply, you assume the person is annoyed with you. You give a presentation, and one person looks slightly distracted, and you are certain, absolutely certain, they thought you were an idiot. Then there is personalization, which is when you take responsibility for everything that goes wrong around you. Your friend is in a bad mood? It must be Something you did. Your colleague seems distant. You must have upset them. The project failed? Obviously, it was your fault, even if you are only one person on a team of 20. And finally, there is overgeneralization, perhaps the most exhausting of all, which takes one single negative event and turns it into a permanent, universal truth about who you are. I failed this exam becomes I always fail. This relationship ended becomes I always ruin relationships. They did not call back becomes nobody ever wants to be around me. One data point. Eternal conclusion. These are the distortions. These are the stories the negative self-talk voice tells. And once you can name them, once you can catch them in the act, their power over you begins to dissolve. But here is the question that really matters. Where does this voice come from? Because it did not just appear out of nowhere. Nobody is born with a harsh inner critic. Babies do not lie in their cribs thinking, I am not good enough. This voice was learned. It was built piece by piece through years of experience, and the earliest, most foundational experiences happen in childhood. When a child grows up in an environment where criticism is constant, where mistakes are met with shame instead of guidance, where love feels conditional on performance, where they are regularly compared to siblings or classmates and found lacking, they do not just feel bad in those moments. They internalize the voice. They take the external criticism and make it internal. The parent who said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" does not have to keep saying it forever, because at a certain point, the child starts saying it to themselves. And the tragedy is that the child does not understand this is happening. They do not think my parent is being unfair. They think I must actually be not good enough, because children are egocentric by nature, not in a selfish way but in a developmental way. They are the center of their own universe, and so when something goes wrong in their world, the instinctive conclusion is that it is about them, that it is because of them, that it is proof of something fundamentally wrong with them. And those beliefs, formed in the vulnerable early years, become the scaffolding of the self-concept, what psychologists call the self-schema, and they are incredibly hard to shake, because they feel like the truth about who you are, not just a story someone told you. But childhood is not the only source. We live in a culture of relentless comparison, and social media has taken that comparison and turned it into a 24-hour-a-day experience. Every time you scroll through a feed full of highlight reels, people's best moments, best bodies, best achievements, best relationships, your brain is quietly doing math in the background, comparing your ordinary Tuesday to someone else's curated greatest hits. And you always come up short. Always. Because you have full access to your own mess, your own doubts, your own failures, and zero access to theirs. And so the inner critic has endless ammunition. Then there is perfectionism. And this one is particularly tricky because perfectionism often wears the disguise of ambition. High achievers are frequently the ones with the harshest inner critics, because they have set a standard so impossibly high that they are guaranteed to fall short of it. And every time they do, the voice is right. They're waiting, not good enough. Could have done better. Others would have done more. And perhaps the most vicious feedback loop of all, anxiety and depression. Because negative self-talk does not just result from these conditions, it actively causes and maintains them. The anxious mind uses negative self-talk to prepare for threats that may never come. The depressed mind uses negative self-talk to confirm a story of worthlessness it has already decided is true. It is a loop with no natural exit point, and unless something interrupts it from the outside, a new perspective, a therapeutic intervention, a moment of genuine self-awareness, it can run for years, even decades. Now let us talk about what is happening in your brain when this voice takes over, because the neuroscience here is genuinely remarkable. When you engage in negative self-talk, when you tell yourself you are stupid, worthless, unlovable, a failure, your brain does not shrug it off, it responds. And the response is centered in a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain called the amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center. The amygdala does not distinguish between a tiger chasing you through a forest and a thought that tells you everyone thinks you are pathetic. To the amygdala, a threat is a threat. And so it fires off the same alarm response. Cortisol floods your system. Your heart rate increases, your breathing shallows, your body tenses, you enter a state of stress. Now imagine this happening not once, but dozens of times a day, every day, for years. The chronic cortisol exposure alone has documented negative effects on memory, immune function, and cardiovascular health. But there is another layer to this that makes it even more important. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change its structure based on repeated experience. The more you think a thought, the stronger the neural pathway for that thought becomes. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so every time you tell yourself you are not good enough, you are quite literally carving that belief deeper into the architecture of your brain. You are making it easier for that thought to arrive next time. You are training your brain to default to self-criticism. And the research on inner dialogue, explored beautifully in Ethan Kross's book, Chatter, shows that this inner voice is processed by the brain in ways that are strikingly similar to how we process what other people say to us. The brain treats self-criticism almost like external criticism, with the same emotional weight, the same stress response, the same impact on mood and behavior. Which means the things you say to yourself matter just as much, maybe more, than the things others say to you. And the consequences of all of this, they are not small. They are not just a matter of feeling a bit down sometimes. The research connecting chronic negative self-talk to mental and physical health outcomes is extensive and sobering. Depression and anxiety are the most documented links, and the connection is not coincidental. Negative self-talk is both a symptom and a cause of both conditions, creating a self-perpetuating cycle that is extremely difficult to break without intentional intervention. Beyond that, chronic self-criticism is strongly associated with low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, that pervasive feeling that you are secretly a fraud and that eventually everyone will find out, and procrastination, which is often not laziness at all, but a psychological avoidance response. When the inner voice tells you that anything you produce will not be good enough, the safest option starts to feel like not trying at all. At least if you do not try, you have an excuse. At least the failure is not proof of your limitations. There is even research connecting negative self-talk to eating disorders, to reduced immune function, to worse performance under pressure, because the very voice you might think is pushing you to do better is actually flooding your system with cortisol and narrowing the cognitive bandwidth you need to perform well. And David Burns, in his landmark book Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, laid out this sequence with stunning clarity. Thought leads to emotion leads to behavior. If the thought is, I am not good enough, the emotion that follows is shame. And if the emotion is shame, the behavior that follows is withdrawal, avoidance, hiding, not growth, not action, not the life you want. Here is something important I need to pause and acknowledge though, because the research on this is nuanced in a way that most people miss. There is a version of the negative self-talk conversation that falls into what I would call toxic positivity, the idea that all self-critical thoughts are bad and you should replace them all with affirmations and sunshine and nothing but good vibes. And that is not what the science says. Studies actually show that mild, task-specific self-criticism can be useful in certain situations. A competitive athlete telling themselves they need to push harder might perform better in a sprint. A student reminding themselves of the consequences of not studying might sit down and study. Short-term, task-focused, situational, mild self-criticism can serve a function. The problem, the devastating mental health-destroying problem, is chronic, identity-based negative self-talk. The kind that does not say, you need to work harder on this task, but instead says, you are fundamentally not good enough as a person. That distinction is everything. And it leads us to one of the most important psychological concepts in this entire conversation: the difference between self-criticism and self-reflection. Self-reflection says, I made a mistake. What can I learn from this? Self-criticism says, I made a mistake. I am a mistake. Self-reflection is about behavior. Self-criticism is about identity. Self-reflection is a process that leads somewhere. Self-criticism is a verdict that goes nowhere. And when you can learn to catch yourself collapsing from I did something wrong into I am something wrong, you have found the crack in the wall, the place where change becomes possible. So what do we actually do about it? Because I am not going to leave you with all this understanding and no path forward. The good news is that the same neuroplasticity that allowed these patterns to form also allows them to be reformed. The brain that learned self-criticism can learn something else, but it requires understanding, it requires practice, and it requires the right tools. The gold standard psychological treatment for negative self-talk is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And even if you have never been to a therapist, you can learn and apply the core principles yourself. The first step is thought awareness, simply noticing when negative self-talk is happening. This sounds almost too simple, but most people never do it. They just experience the thought as if it is reality. They never step back and observe it. Mindfulness practices, even just 5 minutes of quiet attention per day, train the mind to notice thoughts as thoughts rather than facts. Not, I am a failure, but I am having the thought that I am a failure. That tiny linguistic shift creates distance. It creates the observer. And once you can observe the thought, you can question it. The second step is cognitive restructuring, arguably the most powerful tool in all of CBT. It involves 3 moves. First, identify the automatic thought. Write it down if you can, because externalizing it takes away some of its power. Second, examine the evidence. Actually treat it like a hypothesis you are testing, not a truth you are accepting. Ask yourself, is this a fact or is this a fear? What would I say to a close friend who told me they were thinking this thought? What evidence exists against it? If the thought is, I always fail, then honestly, what are the things you have succeeded at? They exist. They have to. And third, replace the distorted thought with a balanced, realistic one, not a fake positive one, not a toxic affirmation, but a genuinely accurate assessment. Not I am amazing and I never fail, but I failed this time. That is one data point. It does not define me. What can I learn from it? There is another technique that research has found to be remarkably effective, and it is so simple, it almost feels like a trick. Self-distancing, specifically talking to yourself in the third person. Instead of, I am such an idiot, I cannot believe I did that, you say your own name. Jordan made a mistake. Jordan can learn from this and do better. It sounds strange, maybe even a little silly, but studies by psychologists, including Ethan Kross, have found that this third-person shift significantly reduces the emotional intensity of self-criticism. It engages the more rational, less emotionally reactive parts of the brain. It creates the psychological distance you need to respond to yourself with the same compassion and perspective you would offer a friend. And speaking of compassion, this brings us to the work of researcher Kristin Neff, whose extensive body of research on self-compassion has fundamentally changed how psychologists think about inner talk. Neff's work shows that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same warmth, understanding, and patience you would offer someone you care about, is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is not giving up on high standards. It is actually one of the most powerful predictors of psychological resilience, motivation, and long-term well-being. People who practice self-compassion are more likely to acknowledge their failures and learn from them, precisely because they do not have to defend themselves from a verdict of total worthlessness. They can say I fell short here, without it meaning I am fundamentally defective, and behavioral experiments round out the toolkit, actually testing your negative beliefs by acting in spite of them. The belief says, I will embarrass myself if I try. The experiment says, let me try and see what actually happens. More often than not, what actually happens is something far less catastrophic than the voice predicted. Now let us talk about the long game, because all of these tools require one thing above everything else, and that is consistency. Neuroplasticity does not work through a single insight or a single practice session. It works through repetition. New neural pathways are built the same way the old ones were, through repeated activation. Which means the goal is not to have one powerful realization and expect everything to change. The goal is to practice daily, imperfectly, persistently, interrupting the old patterns and introducing new ones. And there is a specific way to do affirmations that actually works, because most people do affirmations completely wrong. Telling yourself I am amazing and worthy of love when your brain's deeply held belief is that you are not is actually counterproductive. The brain recognizes the gap between the statement and the belief, and the dissonance can make things worse. But process affirmations, focused on effort, growth, and direction rather than fixed traits, actually do work. Not I am brilliant, but I am learning. Not I am confident, but I am building confidence through practice. Not, I am successful, but I am taking steps toward my goals every day. These the brain can accept. These are consistent with evidence it can actually find. And when the brain can accept a statement, it begins to encode it, to build pathways for it, to make it easier to access, until one day, gradually, you notice that the first thought that arrives is not I am a failure, but something quieter, something gentler, something that sounds more like a coach and less like an enemy. And this is where I want to leave you. Not with a perfect bow on everything, not with a promise that this is easy or fast, but with something true. The voice in your head that calls you stupid, worthless, not enough, that voice is not you. It never was. It is a pattern that was built before you were old enough to know what was happening. It was shaped by experiences you did not choose, by people who are fighting their own battles, by a culture that profits from your insecurity. And because it was learned, because every single piece of that voice was constructed through experience and repetition, it can be unlearned through the same mechanism. Your brain is not fixed. Your inner dialogue is not permanent. The relationship you have with yourself is not a life sentence, it is a conversation. And like any conversation, it can change, it can deepen, it can become kinder. It can become something that actually serves you instead of something that holds you hostage. The most powerful relationship you will ever have is the one inside your own mind. Not the relationship with your partner, not the relationship with your parents, not the relationship with your career or your achievements or your reflection in the mirror. The relationship with the voice in your head. The one that is there when everyone else has gone home. The one that narrates your life. The one that decides, ultimately, what you believe you deserve and what you believe you are capable of. Change that voice, not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely, consistently, with patience and the right understanding, and you do not just change how you feel. You change what you do. You change what you pursue. You change what you allow yourself to become. The science is clear. The pathway exists. And you, exactly as you are right. Now, in this moment, with all your doubts and all your history, you are capable of walking it.